Від громадян Республіки Молдова, громадянам України велика вдячність за мир та стабільність. I learned Ukrainian being a young child, watching перший український, 1+1. We have had peace for 30 years. We have had only one fatality where Russian peacekeepers shot a Moldovan citizen who didn't stop at the checkpoint. Moldovan elites have never really taken informational security seriously. They've never taken energy security seriously, or security at all. And this is such a comfortable lie that many citizens have internalized so deeply that it's very difficult to persuade them of the opposite.
Всім привіт! Сьогодні в студії Європейської правди гості з Молдови. Точніше, гість Михай Попшой, якого нещодавно призначили міністром закордонних справ Молдови. І для нас Молдова важлива через те, що ви сусіди, через те, що у вас досі лишається окупована територія, і через те, що в Україні часом говорять про небезпеку з Придністров'я. Про це ми поговоримо, а також про, звісно, наш спільний шлях до Європейського Союзу.
Все так. Вперше від громадян Республіки Молдова, громадянам України велика вдячність за мир та стабільність в Республіці Молдова.
Прекрасна українська, але, я думаю, будемо спілкуватися змішаною українською і англійською.
Так.
Мігай, я перш за все хочу спитати про Придністров'я. Зараз дуже багато було новин про можливе посилення впливу Росії. Ми можемо чекати, що ближчим часом на нашому західному або південно-західному кордоні буде стабільність.
You might have heard the last few weeks there was a lot of media speculation bordering on hysteria regarding the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. I can assure you, and all the friends who are watching us, that in the Republic of Moldova, including in the Transnistrian region, things are stable, and we'll do everything we can for things to remain stable. In fact, our intelligence service and Ukrainian intelligence service has been very open that there was no prerequisites for escalation in the Transnistrian region. So things are stable, we'll do everything we can for things to remain stable. And of course, we'll remain open about the risks, about the vulnerabilities. But with this particular incident where some media outlets ran with the story that things could escalate when that meeting of the so-called people's deputies in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova were about to meet, the speculation was that they would invite Russian annexation or international recognition. That has not happened. And as long as the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people remain resilient in defending their sovereignty and independence, there is no way how Russians can get to us. So I only encourage our friends to look better at geography and to also appreciate more the effort and the sacrifice that the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army is doing to keep us safe and to keep the whole Europe safe.
Водночас я бачу, що зараз Росія все-таки посилює свій вплив у Придністров'ї. Ближчим часом відбудуться так звані вибори президента Російської Федерації, на яких навіть у Придністров'ї відкриють виборчі дільниці, попри те, що Кишинів сказав, що це заборонено робити.
Unfortunately, that is a reoccurring situation in which the authorities of the Republic of Moldova find themselves. Before, in other electoral cycles, there were 24 polling stations in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. Now they've voiced their plan for 6. We have summoned the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Russian ambassador, to express our strong protest to this. We will take measures corresponding in the immediate future.
А у вас є якийсь вплив на владу Придністров'я?
Well, of course, once we, together with Ukraine, have the joint control over the border, which we've sought for many, many years. Thankfully, we managed to implement this together with our partners in Kyiv. We control the border. So we control everything that goes in and out to the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. We've been very open and we remain that way. We don't want to cause any crisis, any humanitarian difficulties. We are providing everything that the region needs. We look forward to providing more benefits, more services to our citizens in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. And in return, we expect that we will move closer and closer to a peaceful reintegration process. So I guess that is an answer to your question, because we have leverage, but we don't want to necessarily use that leverage as a sort of escalatory mechanism, but rather as an incentive to have a peaceful settlement.
Це дуже важливо, тому що в Україні для багатьох взагалі не зрозуміла політика Республіки Молдова щодо Придністров'я. У нас, ми поводимося або ставимося до своїх сепаратистів інакше. Молдова протягом вже більше 30 років притримується принципу, що ви будете в будь-якому разі вирішувати цей конфлікт мирно. Враховуючи те, що протягом 30 років успіху не було. Зараз ви впевнені, що це вийде?
I wouldn't quite say that there was no success. The fact that we've had peace on the banks of the Dniester River for the past 32 years, that is a success. Of course, you cannot really compare with the situation in Ukraine. You are in a state of war, sadly. And that entails certain reactions. In the Republic of Moldova, thanks to Ukraine, to a very large degree, we are in a state of peace, and we want to keep it that way. And as I mentioned earlier, there is an opportunity in light of the changing circumstances, both with the control of the border, but also with the incentives coming from European integration and the diversification of energy, as we're no longer dependent on Gazprom. There are circumstances that create fertile ground for a meaningful hope for a peaceful reintegration. Unlike some of the other instances in the past where there was also hope for a peaceful settlement, it didn't quite work out, but that shouldn't by no means lead us towards the alternative. We do not see any alternative other than a peaceful solution, because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have had peace for 30 years. We've had only one fatality in 2012. You might remember that incident where Russian peacekeepers shot a Moldovan citizen who didn't stop at the checkpoint, and a peacekeeper killing somebody. It's almost like an oxymoron, because you're supposed to keep peace there and not to kill citizens. But that is a tragedy, but that is the only fatality that we had in the past 32 years. So with the changing circumstances and with the support of our friends in Ukraine and our friends in the European Union, we hope to provide the positive incentives for an actual peaceful reintegration process. That's our commitment.
Продовжуючи цю тему, нещодавно Україна навіть розглядала можливість того, щоб відкривати виїзне консульське обслуговування у Придністров'ї, у Тирасполі, в інших містах. До Придністров'я їздив представник МЗС України. Варто проставити ясність. З вашого боку, немає заперечень щодо того, щоб Україна контактувала із цими сепаратистами, із цією невизнаною республікою?
It's a sensitive issue. We have nothing against Ukraine providing consular services to its citizens. When it comes to the second part of the question, of course, we cannot accept or contend with any sort of engagement with the unrecognized so-called authorities in the left bank of the Republic of Moldova. It is thanks to the Republic of Moldova consenting and supporting this consular services, which have been there before for many years, before the full-scale Russian barbaric aggression against Ukraine. These services were being provided. We totally encourage that process, because we ourselves have an issue with providing consular services to our own citizens in many places. With our diaspora being spread around, we understand the need to provide consular services. The only caveat being that we cannot really guarantee security in that region of the Republic of Moldova. But from our end, there is no negative feedback, so to say, to this.
Я чув також про певні плани, які пов'язані із спільним прикордонним контролем на Придністровській центральній ділянці українсько-молдовського кордону. Я чув, що навіть є ідея відновити транзит з Молдови до України, транзит потягів по ділянці залізниці, яка проходить через Придністров'я. Це так?
That process is already ongoing. That process has been discussed. The Republic of Moldova is very supportive of the solidarity lanes that we've been working hard to maintain and provide to Ukraine. So in that regard, as it is an existential question for many countries who receive the food supplies from Ukraine and for Ukraine to export and to get the revenue out of that, we provide our infrastructure. And if we can't find avenues also through that segment of the border, it's only better.
Не буде ситуації такої, що Україна буде платити сепаратистам. Ми контактуємо з вами, не з Придністров'ям?
As far as I know, that is not part of the agreement. The discussions are held with the authorities in Chisinau.
А якісь обмеження можуть бути? Це експорт зерна, чи може навіть імпорт пального, чогось іншого?
As long as it remains in the civilian realm, there is no limit. We can discuss, but initially there was the discussion about food supplies, but it could also be, of course, gasoline or diesel or whatnot. I think that's up for discussion as long as it remains within the civilian parameters. Then I don't think there is a problem. Prerequisite for this transit corridor to have it a bit more cost effective, to have it a bit speedier, because we understand that rail is the most cost effective way of transporting, and we are investing in our railway system to make it more up to date for our own economic sake, but also to be able to better help Ukraine when time comes for the reconstruction effort. We want to have our infrastructure prepared to serve as a hub to help Ukraine rise up. And Moldova has been very active in welcoming refugees, in providing solidarity lanes. We want also to go further in building the infrastructure with the bridge over the Dnistru, Kosovo-Yampil, and also several bridges over the Prut on the Moldova-Romanian border, so that we can truly be that logistics hub to help Ukraine.
Є вже якісь прогнози, коли мост Kosovo-Yampil може бути завершений?
This sort of infrastructure projects is always difficult to make projections, especially that in the past 30 years we haven't really built much, and that's a shame. Neither on the border with Ukraine nor on the border with Romania.
Цього року реально?
To finish, no, because it's just starting. It's a serious infrastructure project, but as long as it starts, I mean, I'm not a big expert on construction project, but I would assume 2-3 years that should be reasonable.
Що ще дуже цікаво, і насправді це заслуговує на підтримку і українського суспільства, і на те, щоб українське суспільство це розуміло, те, що ви згадали, що не лише Молдова, а і Румунія бере участь у, по суті, цій підтримці України. Зараз, коли ми маємо складнощі із транспортом українського експорту через інші ділянки кордону, Румунія повністю відкрила шляхи для нас і до портів, і до інших держав Європи. Тобто я бачу тут дійсно такий не діалог, а тріалог Молдова, Румунія, Україна.
That's exactly right. In fact, we have an established format, the trilateral platform of meetings of foreign ministers, so that we exactly coordinate our efforts in energy and infrastructure to see how we can better work together to help each other. Because that's what friends do, that's what neighbors do.
Було би неправильно не згадати про суспільний діалог, про те, як пов'язані наші суспільства. Я, звичайно, почну з того, як чудово ви розумієте українську. Скільки ми говоримо, жодного разу навіть не було потреби перекладати моє запитання. Звідки ці знання?
І не буде потреби. I learned Ukrainian being a young child, watching Ukrainian TV station, перший український, 1+1, and I spent some time in the village of my aunt in the north of Moldova, Struzovka. It's a Ukrainian Moldovan village where I learned to be once fluent in Ukrainian. Now I struggle a bit with speaking, but I do understand everything.
Це чудово. А загалом в Молдові багато українців?
Багато. We have, as I just mentioned, whole villages, especially in the north of the country. In fact, in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova, there are about a third Russians, a third Ukrainians, and a third Moldovans. In Chisinau, we have several high schools that teach in Ukrainian, and in general, we have a very vibrant Ukrainian community. Although I must admit that on the sort of not so positive side is that many Ukrainians in Moldova, just like many Moldovans, in fact, have lived under the Russian propaganda and have been basically Russified. And even though they do know that they are Ukrainian, and more often than not, they feel closer allegiance to Moscow than they do to Kyiv, and that's very regretful. And we are working, and will be also making efforts, including with our counterparts in Kyiv, to work more for Ukrainian ethnics in Moldova to rediscover, if you will, reclaim their identity. And that's true for many ethnic minorities in Moldova who from the Soviet times, just like Moldovans again, have been Russified and now are trying to reclaim their identity. In fact, we are now also helping to provide language classes for Romanian language for many ethnic minorities in Moldova, ethnic communities who want to speak and to learn the Romanian language, but didn't have the opportunity, be it Russians, Ukrainian, or Gagauz. And also today we discussed with some members of parliament here in Kyiv that would come to Moldova and they would reach out to the Ukrainian community in Moldova.
Наскільки мені відомо, українська громада у Молдові переважно не просто споживає російську пропаганду, а й, по суті, виступає проти європейського шляху Молдови. Це дуже шкода.
Sometimes it happens. Again, it's not just Ukrainian community. I don't want to single them out in any way, because in this particular situation, this is equally true about our Gagauz people in Moldova, some Bulgarians in Moldova, not to mention, of course, Russians, but also Moldovans. Because of the Soviet inertia and nostalgia, because of the Moldovan authorities having allowed their citizens to live in the Russian propaganda bubble for so many years, and because Moldovan elites have never really taken informational security seriously, they've never taken energy security seriously, or security at all, but it's better late than never. Now we are taking all these factors seriously, and we'll be working with our citizens, because at the end of the day, it's very easy to blame, the Ukrainians in Moldova, the Gagauz in Moldova, or the Moldovans in Moldova who have found themselves under the spell of Russian propaganda. But it's ultimately the responsibility of the political elites that have created these circumstances, have allowed for these circumstances to continue, and quite frankly didn't care much that the circumstances were there. There was even such a cynical situation where some in the political establishment were benefiting from the rebroadcasting rights of Russian propaganda in Moldova, and I'm sure you remember the Russian federal TV channels in Moldova were owned at different periods of time by different Moldovan politicians, and the last one being Plahotniuc, who was making millions and millions of dollars while intoxicating the citizens that you are supposed to serve with Russian propaganda.
В той час, як він виступав нібито на словах за європейське майбутнє.
Exactly. That's the cynicism.
І це приводить до наступного запитання. На жаль, рейтинги підтримки Європейського Союзу, європейського шляху у Молдові далеко не такі, як в Україні. В Україні 90+ % громадян кажуть, що наше майбутнє у ЄС. У Молдові більше 30% проти цього. А якщо було б голосування за те, йти до Євразійського Союзу чи ні, то виявляється, що навіть до Євразійського Союзу готові приєднатися більше, ніж тих, хто проти. Тобто, до чого я це веду? У нас немає впевненості у тому, що Молдова лишиться на європейському шляху.
Of course it's challenging, but we'll do everything we can to make sure that we have a good result, a strong majority for the support of EU in the referendum that we plan, in the constitutional referendum that we plan at the end of this year. We'll be hoping to get the support of the citizens both within Moldova, our citizens in diaspora, first and foremost in Europe, so that we can show domestically a strong consensus, because currently the polls are indeed along the numbers that you voiced, but there was a time in Moldova a while ago where 73% were in favor of European integration. There was about almost 2 decades ago, or about 15 years ago, to be more precise, and that was remarkable. And it's exactly because of the guys that pretended to be pro-European while making money off Russian propaganda and destroying, indeed, the institutions in the Republic of Moldova while pretending to be pro-European. And of course, the billion-dollar fraud, it's a big tragedy for our people and our country. And the support for European integration suffered a bit for no fault of EU, because the EU wanted to help Moldovan citizens. And they couldn't be blamed in any way for the corruption and all the wrongdoings that Moldovan elites at that time engaged in. Now we're in the process of ideally overcoming that level of support, but it's very difficult nowadays when we've had 2 very, very difficult years. Of course, they cannot compare with the 2 years that Ukrainians have gone through, but in Moldova last year or the year before, we had 35% inflation, which we've never had in the past 30 years. Moldovans have never lived in luxury. We've lived by modest means, but at least we had predictability. The situation was stable. There was modest economic growth, modest improvements in the economy, but they were predictable and stable. And when we had this huge economic shock as a result of the energy crisis triggered by Russia, the impact on real wages and real incomes of Moldovans was severe. And now it's very, very difficult to paint this rosy picture and to motivate citizens. But the situation is improving now. We are back to economic growth. Inflation is back to normal. And the projects for next year are positive. And we count very much on the structural funds from the European Union to be able to invest more in infrastructure, to invest more in the resilience of our institutions, to invest more in our healthcare, education, so that we can kickstart the economy and to be truly competitive. So that's where some of the numbers can be explained. Of course, we would like to see numbers a lot bigger, because in Ukraine it's understandable. In light of the Russian aggression, it's understandable that people automatically sort of reject anything that comes with the Russian influence. Unfortunately, the Republic of Moldova, the concept that you just mentioned, the Eurasian Union, which, I mean, logistically, geographically doesn't make any sense, but because of Russian propaganda, it's so deeply ingrained in the psyche of many Moldovans, just like many other propaganda items that they've consumed for so long, that is very difficult to explain. So it takes time to inform voters, and that's where independent and quality journalism, like you do and your colleagues in Ukraine and in Moldova, it needs to be a common effort. We on the political side can do so much, and in fact, you as independent entity are more credible than politicians, because politicians are always perceived as biased, because you have some sort of political agenda. Yes, my political agenda is to see a prosperous Moldova part of the European family of nations. But that doesn't resonate with some citizens. So that's why we need a whole of society approach, and we count on every single citizen.
Складне запитання, але не можу не спитати, коли Молдова розраховує стати членом Європейського Союзу?
Well, it's not really a difficult question, because we said it publicly. We want to be there by 2030. It is an ambitious statement, but it's also realistic in light of where we are today, the achievements that we've garnered in the reform process, but also objectively speaking, Moldova is small. Even though we also have challenges with capacity, we will not deny that, but I think it's realistic, and we think that it's realistic, and we'll certainly work very hard to make that happen. Of course, we cannot compete with the likes of Finland, or who finished their negotiations in a year or two, or some other countries. But several years should be a realistic time frame to finish negotiations and to join by 2030.
Ми будемо йти до членства разом?
Sure, we are bound to be together. Hopefully in the very next few months we'll have the negotiation framework. And once we open negotiations, there will be a merit-based system. Some will advance maybe a little faster, some may advance a little slower. Ukraine has a bit better capacity. We have a little less capacity. But it's a very positive, it's a very good competition to see who can advance, who can, because ultimately it's our shared goal, it's our shared strategic goal to join the European Union. If we can do it together, it's great. If somebody can do it, a year or to the extent to which we'll remain step in step, it remains to be seen. There is certainly going to be no jealousy from our side if Ukraine is one step ahead. And I certainly count on the same reciprocity from our Ukrainian friends and partners. It's a good competition to have.
А до НАТО?
With NATO, it's a bit more complicated. In the Republic of Moldova, support for NATO, again, because of Russian propaganda, because of the Soviet legacy, and because of the political elites in Moldova not doing enough or anything, quite frankly, to dispel these propaganda narratives and to inform citizens of what NATO did in Moldova. I mean, I know a little bit more than the average citizen. I started my career after college working in the NATO Information Center in Moldova. And I can attest that taxpayer money from NATO member states paid for the disposal of Soviet pesticides in Moldova that were poisoning Moldovan soil for many years. That's the sort of benefits that Moldova got from NATO. NATO supported Moldova's Academy of Sciences in the 90s with equipment, getting it into the modern age. And of course, for many years, we've cooperated under the Partnership for Peace, which we'll be celebrating now 30 years this year, and assistance that Moldovan army received in increasing its defense capabilities. So there are obvious benefits. Unfortunately, Moldovan citizens, more often than not, are not aware of these benefits. And they live again under this spell of false assurances that neutrality is a guarantee of security. And this is such a comfortable lie that many citizens have internalized so deeply that it's very difficult to persuade them of the opposite. And you don't really have to go very far in history, because before 2014, Ukraine was almost de facto neutral. It was like non-aligned, non-bloc country. And that didn't stop the aggression and the annexation and all the misery that followed. Not to mention the history of the Second World War. Hitler didn't stop at the borders of neutral countries just because it said on the border that it's a neutral country. That never stops an aggressor. But that's a public discussion that we need to have in Moldova. And currently the support is very low, but we need to discuss, to debate in the public realm, in the democratic process, together with those who are against it, to persuade them that there are alternatives to neutrality. For instance, people in Finland and Sweden changed their mind. People in Austria didn't. We'll see what happens with Moldova, but we need to have this discussion. And it would have been a lot better to have had this discussion long time ago, as is true for many things in Moldova.
Дякую за щирі відповіді. Зі свого боку можу лише сказати, що я розраховую, що ми станемо членом Європейського Союзу разом в один день, тому що конкуренція – це добре, але співпраця – це ще краще. Подивимося, як буде. І дякую всім, хто лишався з нами до завершення. Це було цікаве інтерв'ю про країну, яка важлива для нас, українців, про Молдову. Лишайтеся на Європейській правді, на каналі про Європу, НАТО та роль України у світі. До побачення.